Welcome to the Watch Your Mouth podcast, a podcast all about phrase etymology and why we say the things that we say. I'm Milo.
And I'm Dave.
He's my dad.
And she's my daughter.
That is how that works.
Yes, it is. Today, Milo, we have a special guest.
Again?
Again! It's becoming a thing.
A thing indeed. I'm excited.
Me too.
Who is it?
Well, a couple weeks ago we had your good friend Maya. Well, that was fun to have
pure
her on.
delight.
Pure delight. And today we have someone who's very special to me.
Oh. Are you saying Maya's not special to you? She'll be very offended.
I didn't know her. And now she is,
true.
but before
Okay,
then, retroactively, but now. But the person that I've asked to be on here, and we've been talking about this for a while, this is something we've wanted to do, is I have my wife Carol is on the podcast with us today.
Carol?
She is. She's right here staring at us.
Hi, Carol.
Not speaking.
Hi.
So Carol is actually a French professor at Grand Valley State University here in Grand Rapids, or technically Allendale. And as a French professor, we started talking about different things about language. And there's some really interesting things since our podcast...
I like that you just co-opted being a professor. You were like, as professor.
As a professor.
So that there was vagueness about your professorship.
Really? Was there vagueness?
A little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. But this is a podcast ultimately...
He's not a professor, by the way.
No.
Good to clarify.
I think I could qualify as a professor in some things.
Okay, what do you have a degree in that gives you a professorship?
Ice cream.
Oh.
I am a professor of ice cream. I think, maybe. Anyway, we're getting off track. But...
Are we getting off moose track?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well...
There you go.
That's certainly not the cream of the crop.
I think I get your diploma now, your ice cream diploma. I just throw it out.
You can't take the diploma. That's not transferable. That's not how diplomas work. So, what we're going to do is, since this podcast is a podcast about language, we've been talking for a while about bringing Carol on because there's some different things in the French language that I think are pretty interesting, and she's going to kind of go over a few of those things.
Yeah. So
she's going to drive this podcast. So, without any further ado, that was French. Did you see what I just said?
It was pronounced wrong.
Well, everything. What's the phrase I can never get right?
Which one?
The one of the train. Oh, wow. Okay. The train station. Your brother couldn't pronounce right.
Oh, it's a garden in Paris.
Oh, that too. What is it?
Les Tuileries.
Ooh.
Can you say that?
Say it again.
Les Tuileries.
I don't think I can. I would have to practice.
I can't.
My French is a little rusty.
Mine's beyond rusty. It doesn't exist.
Yours never got there in the first place.
I tried Tuileries, and she's like, no.
Gotta get the back of the throat.
There's no at the beginning. That is at the end. So it's Tuileries.
Sure. Okay.
Tuileries.
Sure. And on to you driving the podcast.
Okay, then.
Because I'm not going to try it again, because I'll fail.
One of the fun things about French is the number of homonyms that they have.
Okay, so we know what homonyms are. Most of our listeners probably know what homonyms are.
Dad poses to be sure that he
just in case.
That's right. I do know. Okay. I know what a homonym is.
Go on, Carol.
Homonyms are words that sound alike but look different and have different meanings. So, like in English, we have pair and pair, a pair of pears.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in French, you can have many, many of those, like ton, 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 ton. Are all different words.
Why did you just say the same word like 5 times?
I didn't.
You did, though.
You
said ton, 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 ton.
I just said your uncle mows your tuna.
We agreed to keep that a secret. We were not going to tell anyone about that.
So, because of that, there are a lot of plays on words in French.
And they have
a lot of puns.
And of course, French is a very old language. Mm-hmm. And so all throughout their history, there is a lot of humor. The French love wordplay.
They really do. And there was one summer when I was in France, I went around taking pictures of all the stores business names that were plays on words.
Cool.
And I had quite an album by the end of the summer. It was really fun.
I would love a coffee table book of that.
Oh.
Wouldn't that be fun?
That would be wonderful.
Did you have a favorite? Do you remember any? It's okay if you don't, but...
There was one that was La Corde à Sauter, which is, if you just hear it, it sounds like a bungee cord.
The name of the store was a bungee cord?
But the sauté was like sauté as in vegetables, cooking.
Oh, okay.
They both mean, sauté is the word to jump, so it's not
translatable so much.
Dear. So it was a restaurant. It was a little, like a lunch place.
Sure.
And it was a fun little place named the bungee cord, but also the cord for sautéing vegetables.
So they were able to
it's
tie
just
it.
kind of a play on words.
So French people see this and they're like, oh, clever.
Oh, they get it, yes.
And Americans like me are like, that's not funny at all.
Why is it a bungee cord?
We don't need bungee cords.
Yeah. There are a lot. My favorite one was a bakery, but it would be too difficult to translate.
Do the French eat bungee cords?
No.
Okay, just want to clear that up.
But they are encouraged, like in marketing, they're told your business will do better if the name of your business is a play on words. You should do that.
Oh,
interesting.
I wish U.S. businesses were like that. Business school would be so much more fun if it was like, we're going to brainstorm puns today.
I'd join.
So I found this page that we can share.
Wonderful, yeah.
That is a whole mess of stores that are all plays on words, and it's very fun. But it also, well, actually, I found some stores that are like that in English, too. Some store names, and like Hannah and her scissors.
Oh.
Instead of Hannah and her
sisters. Yeah.
Or Planet of the Vapes.
Oh, wow.
Or Curl Up and Die, which was the hair salon on The Simpsons.
Oh, my. I think Bob's Burgers, too, like the store next to them is always some kind of pun like that.
Yeah. So a lot of times in English, we have to use a similar word like scissors, sisters, or apes and vapes. Whereas in French, a lot of times the word sounds exactly alike. And it, like, there are so many jokes that, all the French jokes I've learned play on words like that.
There's one of the things that you're going to, because we don't think it's going to come through in the microphone, but it's something on YouTube that you've seen, and it's a very silly, the woman, like, feeds the French-speaking person, like...
it's Google Translate, actually.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, and it's kind of, it's a nonsensical phrase. Something, what was it again? It's got something about glass or...
yeah.
What did we just listen to?
The green frog goes towards, I don't know, I don't remember what it is, but it's nonsense.
But it ends up being very.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Vers 21 heures.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
20 heures, something, I don't know. Yes. So, but it can cause some confusion, and this ties into what we were going to talk about today.
What are we going to talk about today?
Cinderella.
Ooh.
Did you know you knew that? Did
yeah,
you know
but
that?
I like to pretend surprised. I also pretended like I was surprised that she was our guest, and she's sitting literally 2 feet from me.
True,
So
it's true. But the people listening at home, they don't know, or in their car, they're like,
exactly.
Oh, Milo's surprised.
Yes.
You're very convincing.
Carol's hiding in my cupboards, and she just jumped right out.
She does that a lot.
Surprise!
Jazz hands.
Yeah, because that makes it more effective. The surprise. Anyway, sorry.
So, Cinderella has been around a very long time.
How long?
Or some story like it.
A long time.
A very long time.
Oh, boy.
So there are versions of Cinderella that date back to 7 BC.
That is a long time.
That's a heck of a
That's not
long
as far
time.
back as we've gone before, but that's pretty damn far back.
Yeah,
That's second place.
Second place, yeah.
There's a story by a Greek geographer, Strabo, who wrote about a Greek slave girl who marries the king of Egypt, and it's considered to be the earliest known variant of the Cinderella story.
Fascinating.
And there are a lot. There is a Chinese one from around 860, and then some in Italy. The very first collection of fairy tales was written by Charles Perrault in France in 1697. and he wrote a book, a collection that became known as fairy tales, when he wrote down these stories that had previously only existed in oral tradition. And this started a whole new literary genre because they'd never been written prior to this.
Okay.
So his first version of Cinderella was entitled Cendrillon ou la petite pantoufle de verre.
What does that mean in English?
Cinderella, or the little slipper of glass, the little glass slipper.
Okay.
And when I first started looking at this, I got the story wrong. What I told you wasn't exactly right.
Oh, really?
So his first version was the little glass slipper.
Really? I was misinformed about that too, because I heard the whole thing about fur, right?
Yeah. So what happened, this is really funny. What happened was in 1841, another French author named Honoré de Balzac, who I don't know if you've
I have not heard. I have heard of Charles
Balzac. He wrote Le Père Goriot and Eugénie Grandet. I read them, but they're unremarkable.
Okay.
To me.
The Big Frog? Was that what that was?
No, it's the name of a girl.
Oh,
Eugénie Grandet is her name.
Okay.
It's like this tragic love story thing.
Oh, French.
Yes.
No, he's a great author, and his writings are known as classic literature. But I didn't really enjoy that depressing era of French literature, which lasted quite a very long time.
When was that
Forever.
era?
Always.
It actually means French literatures. They're synonymous.
No, we shouldn't get into the whole thing about French literature.
We have before.
But, in the 18 and 1900s, it was pretty dark. When you think of like Charles Dickens and some of those authors that wrote about the common man and their struggles, then...
So it's kind of a European thing, not just French.
It kind of was.
Okay.
Kind of comparable style, and the pointlessness of human affection and existence.
Oh boy.
And
Delightful.
Vanity, all is vanity. It's an ancient theme.
So anyway, he was a great writer. Not as great as Charles Perrault, who was also in the Académie.
So could you talk just a little bit about the Académie?
So the Académie Française is... Oh, goodness, I could go on about that for a while.
Well, we do have a time limit on the podcast, so...
It's a group of writers and philosophers and sort of the elite of French intellectual society.
This still exists today?
This still exists today. It started in the 1600s. Actually, in 1641, they started the Institut de France in Paris. It was Cardinal Mazarin who started it. And I had the privilege of touring where they meet.
Yes.
It was a thrill.
Which was last summer?
It was the summer before. No? Yes.
So
I can't keep it all
doesn't
straight.
matter. It's okay.
It doesn't matter. I think it was last summer.
You have a good story here in this one.
Yeah, so the Académie is this group that oversees the French language, which sounds strange to us as Americans because we're like, well, whatever. Nobody cares about what happens to the English language. In France, they have this Académie that publishes a dictionary, and they approve words that are being borrowed into the language, or they suggest substitutions. They look at the etymology of French words and create new words to replace words that are borrowed, say, from English, like le software. They replaced it with a French word, le logiciel, which has roots that mean words and computer, and they created that word from prefixes and suffixes to replace the American word because they didn't want the English word borrowed into their language. So the Académie Française is sort of like, it's the watchdog of the French language.
Now, I heard something. I want to ask a question a second. I've heard that if you use like les software, they will beat you with French bread. They will just take you to court.
With a baguette.
They will beat you with a baguette. Is that true?
No, that is not true.
All right.
So...
Clear that up. Listeners, if you believe that, it's not true. Sorry, continue.
So Perrault, the man that wrote down this first collection of fairy tales, was a member of the Académie. He was very important, and he was the leader of the modern faction in the quarrel of the ancients and the moderns in the Académie Française.
Oh my.
That sounds like a thing. There's a quarrel?
It was a thing. There was a quarrel. They called it a quarrel because that was a play on words of another title.
Okay.
Of Parallèle des Anciens et Modernes, and he called it La Querelle des Anciens et Modernes.
Okay, so he was kind of playing with it a little bit. So there was a little bit of a disagreement.
Yes, there was. There were numerous debates, and it went on for like 40 years or so. This big disagreement. One faction believed that there had never been as much knowledge or understanding of our world as there was at that time. Like the modern age was the height of understanding and knowledge, and the other group insisted that we were past the height of understanding and knowledge, that it lied with the ancients, with Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, and they were the great minds, and we're deteriorating, and we need to return to the classics. And
what year was this?
This was in the 17th century.
Yeah, isn't that interesting how even back then we're like, screw this new stuff, the old stuff is better.
There's always conservatives and progressives.
Yep, there always are.
Yeah.
But that's something
It's
I think
really
about
funny.
too with the Academy, sorry.
Yeah, no.
Of how, because I did some study in linguistics and stuff, and at least in studying English, we talk about descriptivism versus prescriptivism in language. And prescriptivism is saying, this is what a language is, we must hold to these rules. Descriptivism is saying, let's view the language as it evolves, as an organic creature, as its own thing, and just notice what it does and write that down.
Yeah.
So it's kind of these warring factions. But I think French is very strict in the way of or at least the French ruling
the mentality.
language. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Because certainly there's still French teenagers who come up with slang that isn't necessarily approved.
French slang is a whole nother story.
And then they
It's
get the
very interesting.
guillotine, right? If they're caught
No,
using
they got
French
rid of the
slang.
guillotine, honey.
Yeah, in the 1970s. 1970.
I know.
Last guillotine.
1973.
73.
Really?
My lifetime. And you know who was there to see it?
You.
No, the dude who played Saruman, Christopher Lee.
Oh, I mean, he saw many things in his
amazing
life.
man.
Yeah.
But we are going to have, Carol, we're going to
have Christopher Lee on?
We're going to have Christopher Lee on from
He
the
is
grave,
cast,
doing a
yeah.
seance. There are no limits to the podcast world. But we are going to actually have Carol on again at some point, because a couple things we want to talk about in the future are slang from different languages and profanity.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about
I do.
profanity.
I'm
I
gonna
want to do my
profanity.
doctorate on.
Yeah, profanity?
It's so
I
fascinating.
have some good books for you, because I've read a couple books that I just loved
nice.
about. Yeah, anyway. Yee, books.
So, continue on with the Academy and Cinderella. And
Okay, so at the time that Charles Perrault wrote down these stories, which it wasn't just Cinderella, this included Little Red Riding Hood, Puss in Boots, Sleeping Beauty, and Bluebeard the Pirate, which is not as popular here.
And Bill and
'cause it's pretty
Ted.
gruesome.
Bill and Ted were in that too, right? The original.
No.
Okay, that was my bad. I got that wrong.
Because of the time travel, it mixed up the timelines.
It mixes up everything.
There was a hot tub and...
No, that was a different movie. Anyway, sorry.
So at the time that he wrote this down, objects in glass or crystal, which were delicate and fragile, were meant to reveal the lightness and delicacy of the person who used them, because a common person would break them.
Oh, okay.
Oh, so it's like Princess and the Pea, of like, she's so delicate that she can
She's
feel
so
the pea.
light and delicate,
Yes.
she could wear glass slippers.
Interesting.
And doesn't that reinforce the whole idea of royalty? It's a very much us and them.
Sure.
Like they have different, and almost
They're a whole different being.
it's almost propaganda in a way, right?
Yeah, I can see that.
Almost.
But also mental, you think of like the glass delusion, which we won't get into now, but you're both looking at me very blankly. I'll talk about that another time. Okay, it's very interesting, but I'll explain after.
All right. Okay.
Glass delusion.
Yeah, you have to
Let me
tune,
forget.
tune into future episodes for that.
But there are glass or crystal slippers that are found in fairy tales at that time from Scotland, Ireland, and Catalan.
Different stories.
Which is part of, yes.
Really?
Which
Okay.
is part of France and Spain. Catalan. So in the 1800s, this Balzac comes along, and he's this great writer, but he writes this novel about Catherine de Medici.
Mm-hmm. Is his name Balzac?
Balzac.
Okay.
So I actually worked with a guy at the warehouse. His name was Balzac.
Oh,
his last name was Balzac. It's true.
He might have been a descendant of Honoré de Balzac.
Go on. I'm so sorry. I'm a middle school boy.
Okay.
You are.
I'm a little distracted.
So anyway, go back to the Balzac.
Okay. Hey!
I don't speak French properly. I'm sorry.
On purpose.
All right.
Okay, so he wrote this novel on Catherine de Medici, who was the queen mother in that movie we watched, right?
Queen Margot.
Yes.
Yes.
Her mother, Catherine de Medici from Italy.
Yes.
He wrote a novel about her.
Mr. Balzac.
Balzac.
That's what I said.
No, it's
Sorry.
not. But at the beginning of the novel, he had one of his characters that explained the importance of the fur trade in the 15th and 16th centuries and the exclusivity of these certain furs that were worn only by the nobility, and how the famous slipper of Cinderella was most certainly made of verre, and it was written wrong in that first story by Jacques Perrault.
So he's coming along a couple hundred years after, right?
A couple hundred years later.
Okay, and he's like, he got it wrong.
Jacques Perrault misunderstood.
Oh.
It wasn't verre, V-E-R-R-E, or glass. It was verre, V-A-I-R, or squirrel fur, or Siberian sable fur.
I like Siberian sable fur.
That is your favorite.
It's actually a band name. That was a band, anyway.
You had back in college.
Yeah, I did.
So
only
this sparked
kazoos.
a huge controversy in France. Of course. It's an argument about a word. And it's a debate that is still going on. It has been going on since the 19th century. What were Cinderella's slippers made of?
It sounds like to me that this guy is trying to, and maybe he's trying to. He was into the fur, like he was.
Hey.
What?
He was into the fur. You calling him a furry?
What? No. What? What is wrong with you?
Maybe he had like stock in fur.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
It sounds like he's trying to. You guys had to make it dirty. I would never.
You're the one that called him Balzac.
I didn't name him that. That's his God-given name. But it sounds like he was. It sounds like he was trying to like promote the fur trade and the trade.
Yeah.
Like, hey, what if this beloved story actually was squirrel fur? And by the way, I have a few of these for sale myself down at. Ta-da! It turns into a
Siberian
commercial.
sables.
That's right. Anyway, again, back to you, my love.
So, yeah, there's like this whole big Wikipedia page devoted not to Cinderella, but to the controversy about what Cinderella's slippers were made of.
Is there kind of a common thought on what it really was, or is it really kind of divided?
Are you conservative or progressive?
Oh boy. Which is, well, conservative would be glass and progressive would be squirrel fur or Siberian sable. Right? Would those be the correct positions?
I would guess.
Okay, but originally, the original dude, you think, how do you land?
He wrote it down as La Petite Pantoufle de Verre, V-E-R-R-E, glass.
So which side do you fall on?
But he was translating based off of oral tradition,
Yeah,
so we don't know
writing it
because
down
there's
for the
no
first
paper
time.
trail because it was oral tradition.
Sure, but where do you land? What do you think? Glass?
I think the fur makes a lot more sense because of dancing and...
Yes. In the actual
Running
culture
down
of the
the
day
stairs
of wearing fur as a mark of nobility.
But it also makes sense, the glass crystal lightness and delicacy of a
That is
princess.
And especially
right?
in a fairy tale, which is somewhat fantastical and not necessarily practical.
Although
she did change a pumpkin into a carriage.
I mean, yeah, if we're talking practicality. But also, to be a pedant, as we are often,
Yes.
in the original story, there is that super gross portion where they cut the stepsister's toes and heel off. Is that in the original?
No.
Oh, my
that
goodness.
was a Grimm Brothers adaptation.
Oh, I see. I have all
They
sorts of
did that.
things
There was another thing they did in that one.
They were gruesome.
Well, the pecking
really
the eyes
were.
out, was that just from them?
That was them too.
Okay,
Yeah, that was
interesting.
the other ad that they did.
Okay, yeah, because I was going to say, because it would make more sense if it
Her
was the first
pigeons
slipper.
pecked the eyes out of the
otherwise-
stepsisters.
Yes.
Whoa, Cinderella was vengeful.
Well,
it was a little
the
metal.
German version was.
Well,
Yes.
We are going to actually have an upcoming episode on the Grimm brothers too.
Oh, okay.
We're probably going to have Carol back for that because you did like a big thing on fairy tales.
I've done some work on fairy tales.
Yeah, so we may invite you back if you'll want to be.
But
if we keep on interrupting her, she might not.
No, probably not. That's fair. So continue. I'm sorry.
So there was this woman, Marion Roalf Cox, who did a study of 345 international versions.
Or virgins.
That is a different kind of study.
Of Cinderella, the fairy tale Cinderella. So there are over 345 versions of the story.
Wow.
Around the world.
I wonder where she'd even find those.
This huge story.
That's amazing. That fascinates me, is this story being in so many cultures.
Yeah, it's like the collective unconscious thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Well, it is that folk story type 510A.
Yeah, this is the thing she found earlier.
Oh.
So we're going to go down that rabbit hole a second. She's showing
Arne Thompson Uther Index.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Arne Thompson Uther Index is a catalog of folktale types used in folklore studies.
Oh, interesting.
And the Cinderella story is categorized as type 510A.
Does that mean there's more than 510 different types of folklore stories?
I would guess.
We don't know much about this.
No, I just discovered this. It's very interesting. The tale 510 is the persecuted heroine, and 510A is Cinderella, 510B is Catskin or Podon, which is another French fairy tale that didn't make it in this country for reasons.
Well, some of these fairy tales, as we've talked about,
a little dark.
they get real dark and real twisted. And they're for the children.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, a lot of...
And then Disney came along and changed them all again.
Yes. And now have become at least the American, canon of what these stories mean.
Yeah, they sanitized them.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. My students are always shocked by the actual original version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, because Disney totally ruined that one.
Yeah, because those people who knew the story of Hunchback of Notre Dame and Disney's going to make a cartoon version of it were horrified. They're going to what?
What thinking?
It's going to be like a Heavy Metal, the cartoon, if you're familiar with that. Anyway, it was like an X-rated cartoon out in the 70s called Heavy Metal.
I wasn't aware of that.
No, don't watch it.
Okay.
I haven't seen it.
Back to Carol.
What? Oh, our guest.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So anyway, this lady who studied folktales and this particular story of Cinderella found that only 6 variations mention glass slippers among those 345 versions.
Wow.
Mostly they're out of gold, silver, silk, embroidered with pearls, embroidered with diamonds, or they don't even mention the material. There is a Danish version that's very pragmatic, in which the heroine wears galoshes over her golden slippers to protect them from the mud.
I like the Danes. Very practical.
They're very practical.
Practical people.
So, who knows what they were made of?
Well, it's fictional, so they weren't.
But in the original story.
How do you know? Maybe there's this universal truth found in there.
Could be.
Yeah, maybe.
It's like how there's stories of the flood across, a lot of religions.
Yep.
And it's like,
a lot of cultures.
something probably happened.
Yep. As to what level and what degree and when, who knows? There's even controversy in that among Christians.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other thing.
Yes, it is. What do you think the reason for fairy tales was, given that? Why is this story everywhere?
You mean, okay, so, fairy tales isn't the oral tradition, all of the...
Yeah, are stepmothers really evil?
You're giving me a very strong look as you say that.
For those who don't know, Carol is Milo's stepmother.
And she's great, not evil, I promise.
It's true.
So when Chopin originally wrote them all down, he put a moral lesson at the end of each one.
Is that something he added?
He added.
Okay, so that...
I mean, that may have been the reason for them. That may have been just unstated in the story, and they may have been used to teach moral values to children.
Old Chuck just didn't trust his audience and needed to lay it out plain.
Yeah.
He was like, step one.
Maybe he Disneyfied them, like Disney did their own version of the stories. Mm-hmm. Maybe he came along and said, hey, here's all these great stories that have been passed along forever. Yeah, well, I'm going to make this moral point at the end of it in case you missed it.
Right.
I'm now going to have this, or maybe they always contained that to some extent.
Right, but just more subtly, because a lot of oral tradition stories are either about, passing down heritage or or their tools to teach kids the way of the people, which in often cases is morals. But also, I think there's something to be said for just entertainment and wanting to feel a little bit of magic. That's something that people seem to have always wanted, is a little bit of magic.
We were talking at dinner tonight, actually, about different movies that we've seen and the different abilities to get lost in a story, because Carol has a son who is on the spectrum, and he can't get lost in a story. It's very difficult.
Right.
Because he can't turn off that analytic part of his mind that says, I'm watching this movie.
Right.
And for example, talking about a movie like Jurassic Park, which another person at the table really loved, he was like, I know dinosaurs are extinct. I can't forget that dinosaurs are extinct, so they're not going to scare me.
Yeah.
But other people can get scared by a movie like that, and he can't. Can't get into it.
We, a friend of ours, Daniel.
Who's?
Yeah, they're watching Lock and Key right now, and he squeals through the whole thing because he's so easily terrified. Sorry, Daniel. But anyway, it's just funny how different people interact with story, but story has always been so important and continues to be.
Mm-hmm. I did my thesis on that.
I know.
One of the things that I came across that I thought was a very interesting theory about the reason for fairy tales was that it was actually the women, the mothers, were teaching the children these stories to show sort of as a subversive way of showing how evil the subjectification of women was.
Interesting. I mean, that would track with a lot of what
it really would.
Yeah. So there's a lot of female protagonists in...
And victims.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because, when you see female victims in a lot of movies today, it's either so that a man has a reason to do a thing, which is called fridging now, or because the woman did something morally wrong. Usually in horror movies, they're punished for being sexual or something like that. But you're right. I hadn't really thought of that, about how in fairy tales especially... they are hurt and, persecuted, and they didn't do anything wrong most of the time. Right. Like maybe small things like Little Red Riding Hood kind of goes off a path because she's curious, but she's never, she's never misconstrued as she was, wantonly disobeying her grandmother.
Right.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, it becomes very clear with Bluebeard the Pirate. Are you familiar with that one?
I remember reading some picture books on it when I was a kid, but I'm out of touch with it.
So Bluebeard the Pirate was this pirate, obviously, who would go off on his pirating escapades and leave his wife behind. And he told her she could go anywhere in his castle. She could have anything she wanted, but she could not go in this one particular room. Mm-hmm. But he would leave the key available.
Oh, interesting.
And inevitably, he would come back and his wife would have taken the key and gone in the room. And because she disobeyed him, he would kill her.
Oh.
And then hang her head in that room.
Oh.
And then, I don't know how it started.
Oh, it's like My Last Duchess.
I don't know how it started. There must have been one woman that got beheaded to begin with. But,
he
had a whole series of wives that he killed and hung in this room. And a feminist film director, Catherine Breillat, did a new version of the story. That's a film that's excellent. It's so good. And she does quite a twist at the end.
Okay. What's it called?
Barbe Bleue.
Oh, well, that would make sense.
Yeah. Bluebeard. And she really went into that whole concept of it being against... These stories were sort of to expose the misogyny of society at the time.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, that even woven in some of those stories is the patriarchy and just how often that a man still comes to save the day at the end of those stories. And I wonder if that was original and true to the original tellings, or if that was something added on.
Right.
Like, oh, we have this woman doing this thing and surviving and overcoming the odds, but at the end of the day, here comes this guy swooping down from his horse or whatever, and he's going to save her.
Yeah.
Kissing the Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah, that's one of the main ones that comes to mind, but interesting.
However, Beauty and the Beast, it's the woman that does the saving.
It is.
Well, then that's French, right? Beauty and the Beast is a French fairy tale.
Fairy tales are amazing. And there is a theory that they do represent history. Like, there were these actual events that got just
warped
through
over
oral
time.
tradition, they got warped
as
and passed
they do.
on.
Yeah,
Sure. So, who knows? Maybe in 400 years from now, some of our stories will be all warped.
That is interesting to think about what the, years.
And
with language, too. We think about how languages evolve and what will English look like, what will French look like 300 years from now.
Yeah, well, especially with texting and technology. Because, for example, the letter C in French is pronounced c'est. But c'est can be represented in writing by at least 5 different words that I can think of. But in texting, a lot of people will just put c'est for all of those meanings. So they're losing... There is actually a government ministry appointed to deal with this particular problem, because young people are losing the ability to distinguish, to know which c'est they're supposed to use, because all they use is the c'est in texting to represent that sound.
Well, we all agree that evolution of language is something that's very interesting, and even with what we're in now with COVID and the pandemic, and that's going to change some of our language.
Yeah, and it already has been. It's very fast. Like, times was stressed fast form some of these things. So even just like the sign off of "stay safe."
Yes,
I hear that way more often than I ever did before.
I said that when we first started, when we first left campus. I said to David, I think this is going to change our language. So many people are saying stay safe or stay well when they say goodbye. I wouldn't be surprised at all if that changed to become
I could definitely see. Or if you think of like our handshake no longer being a thing, I don't see that coming back anytime soon.
Yeah, probably not. Yeah, not until we get a vaccine or medication.
Well, and the interesting thing is, because of the polarization, as I saw from a little exchange on Facebook today, it may become a political thing. Like, one political party will shake hands and the other won't.
Well, we are seeing that with like hug-friendly spaces. I'm putting in quotation marks of, that's a certain like flavor that's getting added to some place in this talk of freedom, and it's complicated.
It is complicated. It is very complex. So, what else do you have for us? Is that... Well, it's okay if you don't. If that's it, that's fine. She's nodding, so that's... Anyway.
Well, I mean, I have other things about what defines a fairy tale.
Yeah. I have a question for you first, though, if that's okay. Yeah. About what your feeling is like on the academy and like prescriptivism versus descriptivism. So, I mean, I'm kind of unsure on a lot of it myself. I don't think it necessarily needs to be a binary thing, because I'm against most binaries. But it's like the stuff with like the teenagers creating this efficiency of language. They are losing something in the meantime, but they're gaining this efficiency.
Right.
So I think it's a complicated thing, because I do see, especially a lot of older generations, even in English, really, really digging their heels in against some of these evolutions of language. But in a way, it's inevitable, too.
It is inevitable. However, I got into a little argument with a former student of mine that is in anthropology, and he thinks that there shouldn't be a standard of English taught.
Yes.
That any dialect, any variety of English should be accepted in schools and in writing.
I've heard this argument as well.
In an ideal world, sure, that would be lovely. But I feel that by not teaching the standard to everyone, you're handicapping some people, because the way our society is structured, it's only people that are capable of expressing themselves in standard English that would be hired by a good firm or whatever. You know, like, it will influence their potential for upward mobility in society.
Right. Well, and that's where I think we see kind of this movement towards giving the template for what that looks like, but also not like enforcing it heavily, especially in terms of like African American vernacular English is a specific, dialect of English that shouldn't go away.
No, it shouldn't. But I do know people that can code switch quite well. Yes. And it's amazing.
Yes, but then that also has its elements of problematic of suppressing who you are in certain spaces to be accepted and creating like a white-centric space where people have to speak in a quote-unquote white way. Right. Because there's nothing wrong with African American vernacular English, even if the powers that
understand.
Right.
And that was my point with him, was not that they need to adhere to this white standard, but we need to come to a place of mutual comprehension.
Yes. And I could see where if it was kind of like Wild West, everyone can speak,
whatever.
I could see that evolving into like sects of language and becoming very segregated. Yep. So, I mean, it's complicated.
Because that happens. Right. We've seen that happen in history.
Well, in the Roman Empire,
that's how French developed. Mm-hmm. And Italian. In Italy, they voted on which version of Italian, because they had several different versions of Italian throughout the country when it was unified. Which version of Italian is the most beautiful? They decided that Sicilian Italian was the best. And so Sicily is just this island off the coast, but everyone had to learn Sicilian Italian then.
It's like, there it is. This is what we're doing.
This is the best one. And it was completely arbitrary.
Yeah.
Well, Carol.
Yeah.
Thank you for being on our podcast.
Oh, am I being dismissed now?
No.
Not being dismissed, but we do try to keep it we try to keep it not too long. And we're probably about that at that time.
We're at about 45 minutes. So if you want to throw in a couple more things,
okay.
Well, I never actually answered her question.
Yes, that is.
You guys said so many good, cool things. It slipped me that you didn't. That was all preface?
Yeah.
Wow.
She asked me where I fall on prescriptivism versus descriptivism.
I remember the question. I thought you answered it.
Then we started bandied about in the space of like preface to the question. And
for those of you listeners who were able to follow all that, I apologize because I got lost in the weeds somewhere and I thought the conversation was done.
This is how academia arguments go sometimes.
Well, and then not everyone listening is an academic.
Right.
So,
and that's okay.
That's okay.
Because we're here for the curious, not for the academic, because that's,
correct. But what about the curious academic? Ooh. So answer the question.
I would hope most academics are curious.
Okay.
But go on.
Well,
so true.
I'm a bit split on this because my heart wants to be completely descriptivist.
Okay.
Why?
Because I'm all for inclusion and love and harmony.
That's so true. And we just discussed this last night. On a different matter.
It really grates on my nerves when I hear people say, I seen.
Yeah.
Or it's broke. It just, no, that's not the past participle.
How about?
Or when they don't use adverbs.
Or how about warsh or crick? Is
that to me, that doesn't bother me as much. That's more of a regional accent.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when they're changing grammatical rules, then it, I don't know. There's something about it that just annoys me.
I think you and I are kind of on the same page of that. I was raised in a very, I loved words growing up, and that's always been my thing. And so I was very, very prescriptivist for a long time, and I was like a stickler for all these things. And then I took my first linguistics courses and was like, oh, this is not what I expected to find. Of this sort of like eye-opening experience of like, oh, other vernaculars aren't bad, and like writing them out completely is racist. Oh my goodness. But definitely finding that middle ground is something that I think is hard to arbitrate because we don't have an academy here whose job it is to do that. Right. But also, like, should we even pursue that? And what does that look like in an American society, especially one that's kind of in the shambles that it is now?
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I was talking about with my son and my therapist, not together, separately, in separate conversations, about how frustrating it is when people think that changing the words they use about something is enough when their actions don't follow suit.
Yes.
And we see it in the whole the racial issues going on right now, where people are insisting, oh, you have to change this word. Mm-hmm. But what are you doing that's different?
Right.
Just changing the language is
Yeah.
not enough.
Right. It's a step in the right direction.
Right.
Yes.
But it's not actually accomplishing any of the systematic change that we actually need.
Well, sometimes I think part of it, and I don't mean to be too cynical, is just like we're going to appease people by making a change that's going to seem monumental but isn't really impactful.
Right.
It might start to shift how we think a little bit, but you're right, it's more important that we change certain actions and activities.
Right. And deep set roots of structure that are based in oppression.
Yes. Right. And they're so baked in, and you grow up in that, and sometimes it takes you to get a little bit older to go, oh, wow, I did not realize that this part of culture was either intentionally or somehow just developed to be oppressive. And actually, one of the things I think we're going to do an episode in the future, we hit some already, but we're going to hit other terms that have the roots in their racist and racism.
There are a great number of those in English.
There really are.
Surprising amount.
Yes.
And I agree that those need to be eliminated. Right. Like we shouldn't be making jokes about things that are racist, but at the same time, that is not enough.
No.
Right.
That is not enough.
Not by a long shot. But there's work to be done, and steps in that direction are all good steps.
Yes.
Yeah.
But definitely the powers that be need to get on
forward progress.
Big steps.
Forward progress is forward progress, but I'd rather see bigger steps than the smaller steps.
Yeah. But language is a good place to start, and that's something that you, listener, can do at home in a small way. And obviously also donate and talk to people who maybe don't agree with you and try to help them see the humanity in others and all that lovely stuff.
Yep.
But even just a small thing of inclusivizing, that's not a word, but your language.
Yeah.
And some of it's really deep rooted. Like I have a coworker who will still say like homo to mean like a dumb person or like a bad person.
Oh no.
And like I know she doesn't mean it because she's not bigoted, but like that word is so in her that it's just like, but at the same time, who knows who she's offending, or like not even offending, because I think that's a loaded word, but who she's hurting with that.
Impacting.
Right. And it doesn't hurt me because I know who she is.
Right.
But people who don't know who it is, that is a deep cut sometimes.
Sure.
But when it's in your brain, it just pops out. And so I think a lot of our idioms function similarly.
Well, we need to be aware, right? And sometimes people say stuff and they're just not aware that they're hurting people or what the impact is. But that's why part of the reason why we even do a podcast like this is to get we're surprised that some of the phrases were like, oh, I didn't know. Oh, geesh.
Yeah.
Like hunky dory. That was the one that was eye opening for us. Like, oh, that's got a murky background. That's not great.
Yeah, and I heard, and this one's a lot more obvious, but I heard cotton picking a lot when I was a kid. And
when you're 5.
I heard it again, like in the last few years, and I was like, oh my goodness.
That maybe has an implication.
Wow.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't realize.
And a phrase we're going to look up and probably at some point is peanut gallery.
Yes.
That's very interesting.
And a grandfathered clause. These are very terms that when you know the history, you're not going to feel so good about saying them anymore.
Yeah.
When you realize what that was born out of.
Yeah.
So back to you, Carol. Did you have anything else? Did you answer the question? I still don't know if you answered the question.
I didn't answer it well because I came down kind of in the middle. Because in some ways I am.
But it's okay to be on the middle on things.
Yeah,
like I said before,
is.
Not everything has to be binary. It's okay to say, this is something I'm still thinking about and wrestling with. It's okay to be in an in-between space because we all are on some things and that's okay. Yeah. You don't have to have all the answers.
Right.
Well,
but also, B, it's okay to eventually land in the middle too.
Yeah.
And I was definitely a prescriptivist with my children as they grew up, and my youngest took that very seriously, and he would correct people at school if they failed to use an adverb properly,
Well, he's more a binary kind of person.
He is a binary kind of person, and he is all about accuracy.
Yes.
But I love slang.
Yeah.
And studying slang and profanity is just...
And she uses it all the time. At home, it's
like a sailor.
Disconcerting. At church, I said, honey, not at church.
She's splicing them into the songs.
She does worship team. Like, people are cringing. Anyway, none of that is true.
Oh, goodness. Well, some of it is.
Well, you're on the worship team. You do, yeah.
Yeah, so the thing about profanity, what's fascinating to me is how it can develop differently in the same language in different cultures. For example, the slang in France is different from Quebec.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
we will get into that. Early love of language.
I don't know where this is going.
I do.
She knows where it's going because, and part of it's just because I'm your dad, and so you're always finding things you're proud of with your kids. But when you were a little girl, you know this, you had a doll.
Yes.
Here
we go.
Named your doll something highly unusual.
What was I, 4 maybe?
Maybe.
Yeah.
3 or 4. And we ask, as parents do, you get a doll for whatever, birthday or Christmas. And you're like, kids name their dolls. And you're like, my doll's name is Becky or it's Sarah. That is not what you named your doll.
No, it is not what I named my doll.
It is family lore.
Yes.
What did you name your doll?
Do you remember what I named my doll?
Sahipi Lamucci.
That is it. Sahipi Lamucci.
And we asked baby Milo, what's your dolly's name? And she says, Sahipi Wamuchi. We're like, I'm sorry, one more time.
And it wasn't just baby talk, because I stuck with it. Like, that was its name. I knew what its name was, and I called it. I've cared a lot about names ever since I was small.
Yeah. And anyone who's been listening, the 7 of you who listen to this on a regular basis, know that Milo loves names, and I always try to throw a few in every time I'm doing research. So
for sure.
Yeah. And Carol, did you have anything else that you wanted to... I think were you able to share and answer all the questions?
I believe so.
Okay.
Do you have any other questions?
I have lots of other questions, but...
well, here's something that I remember that we're trying to do at the end of episodes. Usually you're the one that remembers.
Thank you for remembering.
We usually try to... The person who didn't present will say what's their favorite thing that they learned. So I would like for both of us to tell you our favorite thing that we learned. It's like our affirmations that we do, but educationally.
Educational affirmations. I really love the whole idea of the story, and I'm just fascinated by how many different cultures and how many different versions there are of the Cinderella story. And I find it very interesting why that's such an endearing and enduring story.
Yeah.
And there's all these different versions and arguments about glass and squirrel fur and whatever Siberian sable.
Soviet stoat or whatever.
Stoat. That's not what it was.
It was something. It was Siberian
sable.
Sable, not stoat.
Well,
I think sable and stoat is like the same thing. Yeah.
Pretty close. How about you? What was yours, Milo?
So the first thing I learned is that we should have Carol on more often.
Yeah.
She's wonderful. Second thing was I really love being kindly corrected. And so I was really excited to learn that I was wrong about like the fur glass thing. Like I had it different. I thought that it was originally fur in Charles.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah. So to be like,
somebody taught me wrong.
Yeah. So kind correction is a really cool thing of like, I had that wrong. Adjustment. Great. Now I know.
Well, and I thought, I guess I'm not supposed to be the one to talk about what I learned.
Yeah.
I thought it was really fascinating how in French history, there was always these factions, both with Charles Perrault in the 17th century of the ancients and the moderns, and then with Honoré de Balzac when he started this thing of, it was actually fur, not glass, and there was this big debate about that. Like, there are always people who want to keep things the same way that they always were, and there are always people that want to change. And we need to find a balance.
And we need both.
Yeah. We need both.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the kind that's kind.
Yeah.
Yes.
We don't have to be cruel about it, that's for sure, whichever side you land on.
Yes. And I'm not saying that so much as in the literary, and more in just the grander picture of things to bring it back to that. But
100%.
Yes. And I was very delighted to learn of the quarrel.
Yes.
That is amazing.
Yes.
And I was excited to learn that they stopped guillotining people in 1973.
Yeah.
Well, that's our episode for today.
Yes, thank you so much all for coming. If you could review us, that would be great.
Yep.
You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. You can also email us with any comments, concerns, questions, suggestions of future episodes. Feel free to email us at watchyourmouthpod@gmail.com. Anything else, Dad? Oh, thank you to Tony Gebhardt for our theme song.
Yep. And thank you, Carol, for being on.
Thanks, Carol, for being very brave, for being our second She is long suffering with how much we interrupted her, but we thank her for being here and for presenting. She is a wealth of knowledge.
Yes, she is. Very, very. And as I've said it a whole bunch of times, and I'll say it again, she's certainly much smarter than I am. As are you. I'm the dumb one here.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
That's not true.
All right. Well, that's it.
I like that the one thing you wanted to add was just to, like, bring yourself down.
Yes, self-deprecation.
No.
So what do we finish with? What do we close with then?
Thanks for coming, everybody. Have a great day and stay curious. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.